Today we are going to talk about probably one of my favorite topics, which is essentially what to do with low performers. And I think it's a really interesting question because, you would think to yourself, well, we actually do know what we need to do, but do we? Because very often it doesn't matter the organizations that we go into, there just seems to be a lot of non-performance or very little performance, essentially, in a way. And I'm always interested in what that's about because essentially we've got good leaders, we know what we're doing, and things are supposedly working well. But why is it then that there are so many people in the organization who are regarded, I heard this particular topic the other day, regarded as deadwood? And I thought that was a little bit disrespectful, but maybe there's a truth in that. And I said to one person, why do you say that? And she said, well, because it feels like we're carrying dead wood. Thanks, Carl, for letting me know. I see that you can hear me. Okay, so what we're going to talk a little bit about today is essentially what to do with low performers. And what I find a lot of the time, I was in Fiji last week for 12 days and I was working with various organizations. And what I find is that there's a huge amount of mediocrity in any organization. So if it's in government, if it's in community services, less so maybe in private, but let me tell you, they're not, devoid of their own issues. And it's not necessarily only in Fiji, it's also in Australia. So I think part of why I'm telling you this is that part of what I'm going to talk about today is leading people who are in teams that are ineffective or individuals who are ineffective, but also part of the issue around low performance could also be not only the lacking of skills and competence of the person or lacking of motivation, but also the ability of leaders to lead well. And I think sometimes there's an overlap. So when we talk about then just a little bit of an introduction, what we'll talk about is why leaders don't deal with non-performers, the impact low performance has on others. And probably this is the issue that I really find is my most frustrating. It's not my job. And then obviously talk about 8 strategies to deal with low performance and then moving forward. So I really want to get into more of the sort of, content of the webinar. A little bit about me. I think there's a lot of you on the line. Some of you know me. I run an organization called Pure Magic International Business Solutions when I've got my leadership hat on, and I also run an organization called Empowering Women to Thrive. But essentially, I work across 3 continents. I'm a psychologist by training, and I've been developing leaders to grow organizations and teams for, 25 years. And obviously we know that there's a greater and more impactful result that comes when teams work together. But in order to have highly successful teams, you've got to have highly effective individuals as well. And I'll describe as I go through the webinar some of the findings that I find with individuals who don't perform well and teams as well. And I do some writing. I write for the international media and I speak at about 25 conferences a year. So that's just a little bit about me. Here we have just some of my clients that I work with in Australia and overseas, and obviously have the opportunity to work across different nationalities, which is just such a blessing. I really love my work. So some staggering statistics, which I found not that long ago. The 2015 Gallup State of the Global Employment Workplace Report shows that only 13% of employees worldwide are engaged. Now, I was staggered by this statistic. Why? Because if 13% only are engaged, it means ultimately then that 87% of people are not. So what does that mean? That you've got a great chance of having 87% of people who just come and do the job to the minimal effect. You have 87% of people who just get done what needs to be done without real motivation and passion in their work. You have 87% of people who really could be low performers. And I think it's a really interesting thing to understand that if those are the kind of worldwide statistics, what do we need to do to deal with low performance and low motivation? And how do we get our people to become high performers? And I think it's a really important point when we consider that 78% of business leaders rate retention and engagement as important and 26 rate it as urgent, but the trends have remained unchanged for over a decade. And without, wanting to be too much of a frightening statistic, I think it's important that when we are working with low-performing people or we are leading particularly, that these statistics are stacked up against us, and we certainly don't want to be one of those 87%. So I'm actually not sure why I put the slide in here. Sorry, so I've obviously repeated it, but anyway, I'll just move through it. It's what I said a little bit earlier on, so I won't stay here too long. I'll rather go on to the main part of the webinar. So in 2000 really was when I realized that I had to focus more on organizations than on sort of individual clients or patients. I do a lot of work as a psychologist with people. But it was at that time that I actually had a realization, which was ultimately that my mission was to work in organizations. Although I had been working in organizations already, I really decided to focus on organizations because what I found was that the source of anxiety and mental health issues seemed more in the workplace than at home. People would talk to me about a boss who didn't listen or low performance in their teams who are not working together, and obviously workplace conflict and a lack of direction was happening in many organizations. And it's really interesting because when I look at these things that I was feeling in 2000, I'm not sure that I feel very differently to some of the things that I'm hearing already now. I think a lot of organizations have grown and matured over time. But of course, people come and people go, and with more people coming and more people going, you get fresh faces, and often we think, oh, that's a great thing, and, new start, new people. And it does bring fresh blood to the organization, but it also brings other problems. And I'm sure that if you have a look at these things on the slides at the moment, you would find, yep, that looks like my organization, or yep, that sounds like my team. So it really is then about, okay, what are we going to be able to do to move forward with low performers? And I popped these in here because I thought they were so relevant. I was working with a team on Monday, and the manager of the team, the leader, is a woman, and she said to me, Karen, I am so tired of trying to sort this team out. And I just thought that this picture was really funny. But I mean, taking away the humor, is this you? Do you just find that you're just going round and round in circles trying to sort out low performers and nothing really changes? Do you often feel as if going into work you're having a bad hair day? And here I go again, trying to deal with low performers or non-performing teams. And do you just find or think to yourself, I never seem to be able to see the right side up? Okay, so let's just look at a couple of the problems that we experience and see if they are yours. Number one is that it might not be you necessarily, ladies and gentlemen, who I'm talking to on this particular slide, but what I do find in organizations is that somebody, and generally it's the leader, doesn't deal with team problems around low performance. So what I mean by that is that, for example, you might have John in the team. John tends to come at 8:45, even though he's supposed to be there at 8:30. He leaves at 5, although he's supposed to be there until 8:15. So he's already got half an hour extra a day. He doesn't seem to get things done on time. Projects aren't done by 5 o'clock on a Friday when they should be. And what happens then in teams is that other people pick up the slack. So, we're a team, we've got a good reputation, we want to keep it that way. Why do we always have to carry John? And what I find is that very often the leadership tends to ignore the low performance problem, or they're too busy doing what they're doing as leaders, and they don't have the time ostensibly to deal with the low performance. They tell me often there's just too much doing and not enough reflecting. So we don't have time to actually take ourselves out of our teams to really think about how better we can improve our teams or our low performance, because we're just too busy doing as opposed to thinking about how we're doing. Leaders often believe that team conflict will sort itself out. Now, I just want to make a point here. Unless people, ladies and gentlemen, leave a particular team or organization, there is no such thing in my experience as somebody who develops leaders and teams internationally where a team conflict will sort itself out. The only way to sort out team conflict is to talk it through. And I reiterate against another very key principle, which is to have an active and vibrant team code of conduct. It's one of the strategies that we use all the time. There is a specific way that the team code of conduct has to be designed. Now, most of you on the line, and there's a lot of you, might actually say to me, oh, no, we've got a team code of conduct. Yep, we've had that, Karen, for many years. That's the problem. We've had it for many years. So 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, I walked into an organization and there was a team code of conduct in the reception, which was lovely, except the team code of conduct was literally 6 pages long and I wasn't cheeky enough to ask if I could take a photograph. It was on the wall. Nobody reads it. Nobody might really sort of pay attention to it. And when I was talking to the CEO, because I was coaching this person, I said to him, so tell me about your team code of conduct. Oh, we've got one. And I said, oh, okay, so what is it? Oh, it's somewhere. I think the HR manager's got it. The point is that codes of conduct are very, very critical ways to deal with team conflict, to deal with team low performance, and also individual low performance, obviously, as well as the appraisal systems, et cetera, et cetera. But a code of conduct has to be set up well. And if it's set up well, it could be one of the greatest measurement tools used positively in organizations. Often leaders will say to me, oh, Karen, they'll get over things and all will be okay. And I say, no, they won't. And particularly with low performance is what I see often. Well, they're just going through a bad time, or, they're over 55 and I don't want to put the pressure on them. And I often think, well, why then are you leading? You shouldn't be leading, because regardless of the age of the person in your team, they're there to do a job in a culture of achievement and support and enjoyment. And often, this is actually even better, so we just choose to ignore the low performance. And one of the key things when you ignore low performance is it brings resentment around with regards to the rest of your team. People go through bad and good times and will perform better in the future. I was told this actually yesterday by a CEO in Newcastle. And I said, yes, people do go through bad and good times. We're not perfect. We all have good days and not such good days. But how do we know they will perform better in the future? Some people actually enjoy just doing the minimum amount that they're supposed to do. And if we tolerate this, and I think that this is a really important point. I wrote an article for the media the other day, and what I will do is I'll ask MJ to send to each of you on the line. And it was about mediocrity. And here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. The article talks about if you tolerate mediocrity with your teams, you will ultimately get mediocrity. The more mediocrity, i.e. low performance, we accept as leaders, ultimately, not only is a greater level of mediocrity apparent, but you start getting a culture of mediocrity. And once you get a culture of mediocrity, that means across different teams, across departments, and ultimately throughout the organization, you start to have a low-performing organization. And there are many occasions in my career where I've seen this, and often, not always, but often it's because you have leaders who are mediocre in their leading or are mediocre in their jobs. And so you have the self-perpetuating mediocre ability of people and teams in organizations. So the results are obviously efficiencies, not low productivity, things are not done, griping and moaning from team members and from, not only actually team members themselves, but also sometimes people who are reliant on your team to do something for them. They start to gripe and moan because your team is not performing well, or one of the people in your team is not performing to the extent that they should be performing. Resentment occurs. This is my greatest one. People say it's not my job. I'll talk a little bit about that later on, because once you start getting a culture of it's not my job, we've got problems. And once you allow that culture of it's not my job, which ultimately means low performance, which is why I raised it here, and as long as you allow that it's not my job scenario and mindset to fester and grow, you will have problems in your team, and they will struggle with efficiencies, productivity, getting things done, and good relationships both within the team and outside of the team. You just get ongoing team struggles. There was I actually put Bob's Hardware in. Bob's Hardware is obviously not the name of the organization, but this problem was that the team is not performing in Bob's Hardware, and I thought I'd throw Bob's Hardware in as a case study. This particular organization was a medium-sized organization, and they were in the manufacturing game. And we were called in because the team just wasn't working. So being in manufacturing, you're relying on machinery, you're relying on deadlines, sales, distribution, forecasting, all those things that many organizations rely on. But what was interesting with Bob's Hardware was that the team just wasn't performing. And so we were called in to have a look at the team and to speak to Bob and work out what the story was. And what was really interesting is that Bob, as the team leader, was a very kind of involved person. He was very hardworking man, but he was a sort of man and a leader who would take everything on, and he didn't do delegating very well. In fact, he didn't delegate well at all. And he didn't set clear guidelines for his people. There weren't really clear KPIs. There weren't really clear goals. So no goals, no guidelines, and not really clear KPIs. We're going to have a problem around low performance then. Anyway, we went into the organization and I sat with Bob and I identified these things with him. So what had been happening, and I'm wondering if this happens in your team, because Bob hadn't done some of the basics that he needed to do, he then eventually started to get very frustrated. He didn't really know how to lead properly. Why? Because he'd never been taught. And I think in many ways that set Bob up for failure, as it would. But what he then did was he used to get frustrated. So he would actually take on more of the work himself and do more and more and more, whilst the people, particularly one person, a low performer in his team, did less and less and less. And then ultimately the rest of the team started to gripe about the low performer, even though they were low performers themselves. And essentially at the stage that we were brought in, the CEO was going to actually get rid of a whole lot of Bob's team and Bob. And so what it was a toleration of low performance, an inadequately set up team, and a leader who wasn't following through on what they needed to do. And he was micromanaging everything. So he would get involved in what material was chosen, even though that was left to the operations manager. He was involved in some of the basic kind of scheduling of the people on the floor, even though that was the scheduler who was supposed to be involved in that and making the schedules work effectively. So Bob just got involved in everything. And ultimately he micromanages. And one of the key things I always say is don't micromanage, because if you're going to micromanage, why you've got people working for you? It's a waste of time and your money. He told me, I can't get the team to get things done properly, and I certainly don't trust them. If you cannot get your team to get things done properly, it's a leadership issue, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a team problem. So we need to then think about what do we need to do differently to increase performance from low performers, and what we as leaders can do to increase performance. And again, as I say, Bob was in a situation where he allowed non-performance and he just did the job himself. That was it. And what's really interesting in that organization, not actually that team, but even, for example, in the team I was working with yesterday, when you have low performance in an organization or in a team, and it's tolerated, what often happens is that the people around that low performer get really, really resentful. They feel as if they're carrying more load than others. And essentially what you've got is an imbalanced team. So some try harder, some produce more. And, you know, what happens then is absolutely good talent leaves because the leader won't address the problem. And I'm sure if I ask any of you on the line to just put in the question box, you know, is this you? Out of the many of you on the line, probably most of you would say, well, it's not exactly my team, Karen, but this happens in our organization all over the place. There's nothing more disheartening for gifted and competent team members to watch a non or low performer just get by with a leader who does nothing about it, and then the high performers feel resentful because they're carrying the non-performer. And that's the quote that's often used, we're carrying dead wood. And when I asked an organization the other day, what does dead wood mean? Obviously, I know what it means. Their interpretation was, when wood is wet, it's very heavy, and therefore they're carrying this dead weight, and they have to do for this dead weight what this person should be doing for themselves, which I thought was a really interesting analogy, but that could be you. So what are the solutions? Well, obviously I wouldn't be able to tell you all on the webinar today because it would take me a lot longer than that, but there are some. If you are leading a team and you are a leader on the line, first and foremost, I would say is learn the dynamics and strategies of how to run a highly performing team. And obviously within that then comes understand the principles of leadership and how to manage inefficient and low performing people. Because if you don't know how to do that, you know, you set yourself up for failure, because at the end of the day, we will always have teams with us or under us or even that we're in, where people are inefficient or people are low performers. Not always, but most of the time. And if you are leading those teams, you have to learn how to deal with this. And I was working in Africa at the end of last year, and what a very good manager said, or leader said to me, I don't really want to offend them, Karen. You know, they're a great guy, and they've got some personal issues, but they're not performing. And it's going to sound very heartless, but here's the thing. If you have somebody who's a low performer over time and you know that they've got personal problems, I think it's well within the leader's rights to tolerate low performance for a particular period of time. You know, we all go through bad times. We all struggle with life at times, and I think it's wonderful for a team and an organization to support and help people who are struggling. However, there has to come a point in time whereby we have to move on, maybe still provide them with the support of counseling or EAP or whatever it may be that they need. But we have to then bring this person and the role that they're actually performing back up to speed. Because if you don't do that, you've still got the same problem that you had, which is low performance. And as I've just made the comment, low performance essentially is a leadership issue. It's not a person's issue unless they're incompetent, obviously. But generally we know that if people in a team are not doing what they're supposed to, it's because there's some leadership issue involved. And if you as a leader don't address these issues, it actually impacts you. And what do I mean by that is that leaders are chosen to lead or are leading for particular reasons. That is that the managers or the leaders or the bosses have seen them as somebody who have the opportunity and the capacity to lead others. Having said that, though, there are many organizations that we go into where you'll have people at the top of the organization, even the CEO, or heaven forbid, members of the board, who've got to the position that they've got. So let's use the example of a CEO, because they've been there since they were 18 years of age. They're now 58. You know, they joined as a junior salesperson or even, for example, in the post room, and they've worked their way up the organization. And so they're doing a good job, and people respect them generally, and people like them generally. They've got a lot of experience. But if they don't address low performance and they allow mediocrity to taint the team of the organization, it starts to impact their reputation. And people might say, well, you know, Johnny's a nice guy and he's a really good man, but he's not really fit for leadership because he doesn't deal with issues that are going on in the organization. I see this time and time again. So first and foremost, to learn how to lead. Secondly, to understand what to do with low performance. And number three, I think, to be very firm and fair in your role of dealing with non-performers or low performers. Because if you don't, well, all the reasons I've described already will happen. And I think one of the key things beside a code of conduct, another tip, is to set firm ground rules with your team and all of your, people so that they can learn to be high performers. I always say it's good to be seen as fair and firm. You know, if you are too fair and not firm, often leaders are seen as walkovers. If you are too firm with no fair, then what happens very often is that you lose good talent. You know, an autocratic firm, you will do it this way and you will do this now, is great for the military and it's great in a situation of crisis, but everyday leading, an autocratic leadership style is really not the way to go. So learn how to lead in order to deal with low performers. This is a great one. I love this one. It's not my job. Now, when I hear a team or a low performer, or heaven forbid, even a leader say to me, it's not my job, I'll tell you something, you've got an attitude of mediocrity. Why do I say that? Because in every team, and if we're talking about highly performing teams, and my job when we go into organizations is to move teams from low performance to high performance over time. And when I walk in and I hear it's not my job, immediately, without even asking any other question, I know we're dealing with low performance. So this attitude of it's not my job says to me low performance before we even get off the ground. And when I was thinking about the other day, last year, I heard this particular comment across different organizations in which we were working over 207 times. So if you're a member of a team, for example, when somebody says to me, it's not my job, I say, well, great. If it's not your job, then whose job is it? And they might say to me, well, it's not my job, it's Sally's job. Oh, okay, so is Sally one of your team members? Yes, but that's Sally's job, not my job. Now, role clarity is a good thing. We need to know what we are each supposed to do as team members to be highly performing and achieve our goals. But my comment to this person was, so if Sally's busy, are you going to help Sally? Well, no, it's not my job. So this, for example, might be a team that has fairly good outcomes, like they kind of get their goals, but notice that the attitude of this person is still segregated. What I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you've got a highly performing team, then everybody's job is everybody's job. It doesn't mean I'm going to do Sally's job forever, but Sally's struggling, Sally's sick, Sally's unwell, therefore I'm going to help Sally. Therefore, everything is my job. And once you get this can-do attitude in organizations and teams, once you get this, opportunity to really think about how we can do this together, you start moving towards high performance. But as soon as I hear it's not my job, we're dealing with low performance. And if we keep allowing low performers to think it's not my job, I'll tell you something, here you go. You lose top-class people who are tired of working in a I don't care environment, which is generally low performers. Your organization generally over time experiences a downturn if you've got a myriad of low performers. Things don't get done. Customers walk out the door. If you're a funded body and you lead or an accredited organization, you could lose it. Lose job, lose company, lose house, and so lose good staff. And at the end of the day, what happens is it's because we're allowing low performers. So would you like to know how to fix these issues? Now, obviously, as I said, I can't go through all of these in, an hour session, but I can certainly start talking a little bit more about these. So I think before we go anywhere, I think it's a really interesting exercise to identify what is high performance. So when I was working with an organization in the community sector last week, and there were 20 people in the room, I said, tell me what high performance is. And they got probably out of 10 indicators of high performance, they got 2, which was an interesting experiment for me because it says to me then that that particular team doesn't really understand what high performance looks like, right? Now, there were some senior people in that room. The point that I'm making is this. If the team does not know what high performance is for their particular team, or the leader does not know what high performance is for the team, then my question to you is, how do we achieve high performance if we're not sure what it is? So I always say, well, let's go back to the basics. What is high performance and how do we create it? And essentially, it's individuals or teams who are clear about the company and departmental goals, like what are we trying to achieve? What are the goals for the particular department or team? Another thing is, what is exactly my role? And this particular team that I was explaining to you about, and this is so common across many organizations, is they've got goals, kinda, they've got job descriptions, absolutely, but they don't have clear key performance indicators. So because they don't have clear performance indicators, they're not sure how to achieve the goals. And if they don't know how to achieve the goals, then how are they ever going to get the job done? So part of achieving goals and helping each other is to work in a supportive and achievement-orientated culture that allows them to grow. So I want to give you a quick example of key performance indicators. If you've got a piece of paper and a pen, this is the example I'm going to give you. So I'm a window washer. What is my job? My job is I'm a window washer, and the description is that I go around the organization keeping windows clean, making sure that windowsills are free of dust and that, you can see through the windows. That's my job description, let's just say. My key performance indicators, this is example number 1, is, well, I'm not sure I've got to keep the windows clean, and I've got to make sure that, people can see through them. Okay, so how will you know when you've got to do that? Well, I clean the windows when they're dirty. Fair enough. When are the windows dirty? Well, when they're dirty. Yes, but when are they dirty? Well, when you can't see through them or when they look a little bit shabby. And I say, okay, but how do you know that they look shabby to you and they don't look shabby to me? Well, I clean them when I need to or when my boss tells me so. Now listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. This is clear and very important around low performers. That person being me in that window washing job is set up for failure. Because why? Because I don't have any indicators that tell me what I'm supposed to do, really. And then my manager calls me in one year and says, well, Karen, in terms of competence, you're probably a 4, maybe 5 out of 10. You don't wash the windows when they should be washed. No doubt I don't, because I don't know when they should be washed, because you've never told me that. So I'm going to give you a 4 or 5. That is how I find, or we find, KPIs in many, many organizations. Now listen to this as a second example. What is my job? I'm a window washer. So, okay, I wash windows when they're dirty, etc., etc. But I wash windows every Monday, every Wednesday, every Friday at 2 o'clock with one mop, one bucket of water, one spud thing of soap, and then I put my finger around the outside of the window to make sure that there's no dust. There are 9 indicators I have just given you for one job. And then what happens is my boss is thrilled with me because she's told me to wash them every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 2 o'clock, etc. She can measure me if I'm doing it. I either am or I'm not, and I am. And she's happy with my performance because there's clarity around what it is that we're supposed to be doing and how I'm supposed to be doing it. She can measure me, and I get a great performance rating. And I'm working in an environment where she's supportive and helping me. So the point I make is that whilst sometimes leaders don't know how to lead, really, the other thing could be that we don't set the job descriptions and the KPIs up enough for low performers to know what they're supposed to be doing. And I think also that mistakes can be made, but lessons need to be learned in high performance. Tasks are completed and relationships are great in the department and the company. When we talk about organizations and teams, there are 2 parts of teams. One is the tasks, getting the job done, but the second equally as important part is the relationships, the fun, the harmony, the enjoying coming together, the enjoying working side by side is as critical to your team as is getting the tasks done. So what is low performance? Well, each leader needs to be clear about their low or high performance, as I just said. Low performance generally implies that a person or team is not achieving what they are supposed to achieve and not consistently in accomplishing the tasks, obviously, or in having good relationships with each other. And obviously, if you've got, as I said earlier, low performance that's right throughout your organization, you will get more of it if it's allowed to remain that way, which affects outcomes and performance. So what are the 8 strategies to use with low performers? I think first and foremost, it's important to be clear about why they are underperforming. Is it any of the reasons that I've just described to you? Is it because your leadership style needs to be more determined around what they're doing? Do they need more coaching? Do they need more training? Are you part of their low performance problem, or is it more on their side? I think when we are dealing with low performers and we're leading low performers, we need to, as leaders, think about what could I be doing differently? How could I be helping this person really thrive, and be clear about why they're underperforming? Ensure they have a clear position description, shall we go, key result areas and key performance indicators. And there you go. That's the example I gave just now with the window washer. If your performance indicators are vague, then I'll tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, expect vagueness and expect mediocre outcomes in roles because people are not sure necessarily about what they should be doing. Spend time with them. Communicate with them about their difficulties and areas of non-performance. Why I put this in here is because unless you spend time with them understanding why they're not performing or helping them, giving them some on-the-job training, keep in touch with them, connect with them, communicate with them to understand where their struggles are. There was an issue the other day in an organization. We were in another organization, not the other examples I've given you, where there was a really good performer on the floor, again, on the manufacturing floor in another company, and his manager said to me, that guy used to be so good at his job, and he's just dropped off. He's really pretty crummy. And I say, well, what's been going on? I don't know. When I ask him, he says nothing. He's just tired. And I said, well, it's very unlikely, though, then that because he's just tired that things would have dropped off. Of course, it can be that he's just over it and he needs a good holiday, absolutely. But what else is going on? Nothing, he says. When every time I ask him, he's fine. And actually what was going on, which I think is really interesting, this guy was going through a major divorce. He'd kept it to himself. He was very, very distressed. And his manager didn't know. And I think it was more around the leader, the manager, not asking the right questions. Or could it have been that the relationship with the manager and this person wasn't strong enough for the employee, who used to be a high performer, now a low performer, didn't feel comfortable telling him about it? I think it's a really good thing that we need to think about with regards to performers, in particular low performers. Do we know our people well? Do we connect with them? Or don't we show enough interest? And once you understand what the low performance is about, develop a strong development plan for them. Follow the plan with them. Ask them what more training or upskilling or EAP or support they may need. And ultimately every week call them in and talk to them about, how they're going. Talk to them, not necessarily only task discussions, ladies and gentlemen, how's your role? How are you going? Have you made XYZ bags today? Whatever it is that the job is. But how are you really? How are you feeling emotionally? Tell me a little bit about where you're at. I think traditionally in organizations, we focus on people and the tasks and what they're supposed to be doing. But we've not really historically, and there's a lot of research around this, actually tried to understand and have better relationships with our people. Relationships are key. I say that wherever I am, whichever organization or whichever continent I'm on. In fact, in many ways, relationships with your people are more important than tasks. Why? Because if your relationships are good with people, they trust you, they want to follow you, you've got firm, strategies and policies and goals, they will go to the ends of the earth to do what it is that you want. But if you just focus on the tasks and not building the relationship and showing an interest in them, you might just get mediocre outcomes. So working on connecting well with your people, I say, is always a key strategy, not only in low performance, but in performance overall. When you've got a low performer, evaluate them constantly. And I ask as well that you give a lot of positive feedback, not just the negative feedback. So if they are trying, even if you don't think that they're really hacking it, you still validate, look, I think you're really trying and I appreciate that. I still don't think that you, as productive as you could be or efficient, but I'm going to help you with this and I'm going to help you with that. Keep trying. I think very often what I see in organizations is leaders just saying, well, that was pretty crappy, or you haven't done this well, and so you're going to, you have to go home, or whatever it might be. We need to evaluate and give feedback all the time. And of course, hold regular assessment discussions with them. And I know most people do, but not all. Upskill and train them to have skills and competencies to perform well. An organization that we're working with in Australia, a retail organization, they have got people in the stores that they recruit. And I think this is a really important little case study. So they recruit people to go onto the floor, the shop floors, which is lovely. And what they do is on the first day, the people come in and they put them on the floor and off they go to sell to whoever comes into the floor. And we were called in because, you won't believe this, but they had a 63% staff turnover rate on the floor. 63%. Ladies and gentlemen, that's over half of the people on the floor were leaving within a 3-month period. So the organization was struggling. They were actually really going downhill because they didn't have a settled workforce, because as soon as people came, they'd leave. And it hadn't actually occurred to them, this is really interesting, believe this or not, that they needed to upskill the people who they recruited. So the people who they recruited supposedly had some skills in this retail industry, but maybe not. But they didn't have any induction. The induction, I love this, came 4 or 5 months later. Not sure why that was. Oh, I am sure why that was, but it really was just bad planning. But my advice was, right, so let's design a training program, and you send the new people on a training program for 2 days, explaining the product range, showing them how to use the product, the features, how to sell it, and then you may, take them around to the organization, introduce them to people, get each departmental head to come and present to them. Funny that, which they then implemented. We wrote the training program, they then implemented. And guess what? They've now got a 14% staff turnover rate. Surprise, surprise. So, when we think about upskilling low performers or performers anyway, it's a really important part of what we're doing as leaders. There was one organization I was speaking to probably about 3 weeks ago, and they've asked us to help them with their performance appraisals. And I spoke to this one person. I said, so when was the last time you had a performance appraisal? And he looked at me and he said to me, well, what do you mean? I said, well, how often do you have a performance appraisal, where you are appraised on your performance? And he said, the last one I had was 13 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, did you just hear what I said? 13 years ago. No wonder the company struggles. And if you need to, I say give a low performer a buddy, a mentor for a time. Get them to hang on to somebody who can show them and guide them. But I think there's also some time, which I might discuss, I think it's in a later slide, where we put all of these things in place. But at the end of the day, if you continue to have low performance, even though you've done all of these things here, then you need to think about deselection. Because if you continue to carry the dead wood, you will not maybe deselect the low performer, but I'll tell you what will happen, which I mentioned just now. There's a good chance that the good performers in your team, the people who are really doing a great job and thriving, are going to deselect themselves because they're tired of carrying dead wood and seeing you or the leader not doing, the right thing by the rest of the team. So you follow the disciplinary process or deselection if needed. And I think we need to be very clear about that because in a lot of organizations, particularly in the community-based organizations that we go into, there seems to be a fear, a reticence around deselection. And I think part of it is that in the community sector, we're here to help people's lives and to make sure that, people live well, homeless, disabled, foster care, all that sort of stuff where we work so often. But at the end of the day, whatever business you are running, it is a business. And you cannot afford to have low performers because the reasons I've just described. Not only does it affect outcomes and goals and professionalism, etc., but it also affects your reputation as a leader. You want to be seen, if you are a leader on the call, you might not all be leaders, I appreciate that, but you want to be seen as a leader who's highly performing, energetic, positive, people really look up to and is a great role model, as opposed to one who's a pretty nice person but tends to not have a highly performing team because, as I said earlier, it's reflective of your ability and your capacity to deal with low performers. So really it's about modeling the behavior that you want and allowing the behavior that you want. So, coming back to if you want high performance, well, obviously you as a person leading the troops have to be highly performing. Focus on your relationships with your team, absolutely focus on the tasks, but have equal focus on both, not just the tasks. Give low performers the opportunity to improve, but there comes a time where you need to be very clear about the fact that I've done all I need to do or can do to help this person, and I'm going to make one of those really courageous decisions as either a team member or a leader or whatever it is that I have to actually move this person on. So obviously all of you on the line have got some of these issues going on in your organizations, and I thought I would just show you how potentially we could help if you were interested. There is no cost involved in here at all. We obviously run leadership and team development programs, as I said, Australia, Fiji, and Africa. And we don't take them off the shelf. We really design what it is that each particular client needs. So we customize and we make it applicable to you. We run various one-day staff and management programs, resilience, leading with change, accidental counseling. They're all on the Pure Magic website. We do leadership retreats and I do an enormous amount of coaching. So these are some ways that we could help you. And I think it's important that, you work out what it is that you really need, where you need the help. And particularly if you've been in a position where this has been recurring and going on and on, and it just feels as if it's never ending. You're very welcome to book in a free half-an-hour session with me. We can talk some of your issues through if you would like to do that. And if you would like to do it, it's absolutely, there's no cost involved. It's for you to maybe try and help you get on the road to dealing with low performers. You have to go onto that particular time trade link, and it'll, you'll be able to choose a date and a time. Or if you would like, we're also happy to come and do a free review of your problem if you would like, at no charge in your organization. Obviously, if you are regional, then it would have to be in line with some of the other work that we might be doing regionally. And obviously, if you're in an overseas country where we work, then I'm happy to do that when I'm in that country. If you are in Australia, well, probably would be able to do it more rapidly because I'm here for a little while now. So it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this evening, this morning, whichever it is. For some of you, it's evening because you're overseas. In fact, we've got a lot of you today who are overseas. So for those of you who are in New Zealand, welcome. For those of you who are in the States, I see there's one from California, one from New York. It's a really warm welcome to you. It is your evening. It's our day. And obviously to my Australian brothers and sisters out there, it's great to talk with you. So now's the time. If any of you have any questions that you would like to ask me about low performance, I will ask MJ to send you the article on mediocrity and what to do about it. But we've got a little bit of time left, and I thought I'd be very happy to take any questions should you have them. So go for your life. Let's do it. Okay, so here I have one question. Thank you. It's an interesting question. So what do you do when the leader is the non-performer? Well, that's the age-old question, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen, when the leader's a non-performer? What I find when leaders are non-performers is that generally, well, it's understandable. You'll get teams that aren't particularly highly performing. And they're not highly performing because they've got a non-performing leader. What you generally find is that you find that people leave, people go into other teams or other organizations. And what I also think is important is to discuss some of the situations you have or the frustrations you have with the person in HR. Really, the other issue is to go to the leader's manager or leader. There's difficulties in that for a whole range of different reasons, as you can appreciate, because you're jumping what we call the organizational line, and that could be difficult for you because there could be some sort of kickback to that. But essentially, if you're working with a low-performing leader, you won't really thrive in the role. Sometimes there was an organization that this was sent to where an anonymous letter went through to the CEO and was followed by another one 2 days later. So it was various members of this particular team that didn't want to be named or shamed, which is interesting. That says a lot about the culture. Eventually what happened was the CEO was then made aware of this particular situation, and there was a performance improvement plan, a PIP put in place for this leader who is now, being developed. The part of the problem was that they didn't have any skills to lead, and I think that was more an executive problem for not identifying that, and essentially they set this low-performing leader up for fail. Again, if that doesn't happen, the CEO doesn't listen and nobody else does, I think if you're a member of that team, then you've got to really think about whether you should be staying in that team or not. And I'm certainly not suggesting that you leave. I don't encourage people to do that, but paramount, I think, is your mental health and your emotional health and, living a fantastic life, because this is about you. So that was a really good question. Thank you for asking it. Any more that I can help you with? No? Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really great to speak with you. If there's anything we can do to help you, we would love to. Please send me an email. Please go and have a look at the Pure Magic Business website. Please book in a free time trade, and I'm really, really happy to work with you. So look forward to hearing from each and every one of you. Have a fantastic Thursday. Bye for now.